Hello and welcome to Leadership, the Future and Tea, a podcast hosted by Andy Davis featuring Ian Moffat, Deborah Hartung and Hiten Bhatt, a podcast for people who are passionate about making a difference at work.
Welcome everybody to Leadership, the Future and Tea, and this episode is about servant leadership, and today I'm joined by Ian Moffat and Deborah Hartung. How are you doing?
Great, thanks Andy.
Yeah, doing good, thanks Andy.
Hey, good stuff. Good to speak to you both. It looks like Hiten's not with us today, so we're going to get started on this. And let me tell you, every week that we do this, we pick a different topic, and some of these challenges in different ways, and our current understanding or our current approaches to work. And this was no different. So servant leadership, for those who haven't come across this before, this is something that Robert Greenleaf coined in about 1970s, call it 77 with his book. And just in a real nutshell, okay, it's about a leadership philosophy, and the main goal of that is about the leader being a servant of the rest of the team, okay. Now, it's very different from traditional leadership models as well, and we're going to touch on this later on. But what I just want to do for those that don't understand the background to it is just explain a little bit. And in this, what I want to just cover off is literally the first couple of paragraphs of his book. And where this came from was Greenleaf actually went away and read Hesse's Journey to the East, which was a book from the 50s. And what he talked about in there was this group of people who were on this journey out into the East, and they'd been sponsored by a secret order. And this guy, Leo, was the servant amongst all of this. But Leo was more than just a servant. He supported people, he looked after them, he was kind of their inspiration, he was their sort of even dancing and music and keeping them entertained, but he motivated people and he had this extraordinary presence. Now eventually Leo left the group, and it was only when he left the group that the group started to disintegrate, and at that point they abandoned the journey. Years later they went back to the secret order and realized that Leo was the leader of the secret order, and what he was doing as the servant was actually leading the group. Hence, servant leadership. Okay, now that's a nutshell. Guys, have you still got me so far?
We're here.
You're here with me, right, great. So I just want to go through that because that actually is probably one of the key pieces of learning about servant leadership that people need to know about, I think. Okay. Now that's what we're going to discuss today. So, and we're going to leave you with some resources as always, so you can go away and read this properly for yourself. But enough of me. I want to kind of bring in Ian at this point and say, Ian, I know you've been reading about this. So what does servant leadership mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And out of all the ones we've done so far, and we've done a few, it really was tricky. It really, really was tricky because this has really got under my skin.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, and I'll come to this as we kind of go through. Is kind of really questioning your motivations behind some of your behaviours, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And why you're doing it. So a little bit of scene setting, not to I don't want it to be too obvious, but people are already up to speed with this subject. But for me, read a few books on it in the past, back up to speed with a recent book, which is my resource for the day. And then my own experiences, right? So there's a piece there, just the starting point. There's a piece around knowledge.
Yeah.
There's a piece around understanding through the experience of, dealing with different types of leaders that have led me over the years.
That's right, yeah.
And so it's kind of in the heart of it, so head, heart. And then I was kind of looking at this and I was going, oh, you know what? This is really bad. This is really, really bad because I'm rereading this and it's really, actually, the principles are really simple, but I haven't made it habit. I haven't absolutely made this habit. Why haven't I made this habit? Because I feel quite strongly about it. And there's a big difference between knowing something and talking about it and actually the actions that you follow through on. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I'll go with that completely.
So that for me, I've been questioning myself, sort of every night for the last week and a half as I kind of got into this. So I've got a really good resource at the end, which I'll leave people with. Good. But so the good news, first thing, I think the principles of servant leadership are really, really basic, right? And I actually think they're really natural, which is why I've been kind of a bit conflicted, thinking, why haven't you made this into a habit? And it's actually established over a significant amount of time, because if you start to extend out the principles of it, they go back to Socrates and various well-established religions that are at the periphery of this, because You could articulate this as, I want to lead people the way I'd expect to be led.
Sure.
I want to treat people the way I'd be expected to be treated. So there's some pretty long-term pieces there. Where I got to, first and foremost, is just to kind of distill this down into probably 4 attributes which have got, polar opposites, which I'd like to just lay out and then just give some illustrations, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's, I've kind of articulated it down distilled it down, to
sure.
4 kind of key dimensions which have got sort of polar opposites, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I do that is to then work out where you are on that, which kind of lets people understand your behaviors, right, when you're leading. So the first is power versus authority. The second is control versus influence. The third is task versus relationship. And the fourth, and I think a really important one, is wants versus needs.
Okay,
and I'll give you an example, right? And these are, textbook type examples. If you think about authority with no formalized power, well, look at Gandhi.
Yeah. Fair point. Great one.
Martin Luther King. These are obvious. What about Greta Thunberg?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's 21st century, isn't it?
If you think about the authority that she has with no power whatsoever, but then if you start to walk down through that and you think about the influence, and you think about that what she's dealing with is dealing with our needs, not necessarily our wants. I think that's quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And then the other reflections I've had is if you think about how much modern leadership in the political sphere, without getting overly political, is about satisfying the wants of the populace,
right?
As opposed to the needs. And the differentiation I would make there is that the needs are about balancing out in the longer term what is best for people, not necessarily what's in the immediate wants, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at the other ones. Let's look at the dimension of control and influence. You can control people. That's what you want to do. You can control people, but you've got a time frame around that. So one of the principles I like is this idea that we're all essentially volunteers. We all have a choice to work there or not to work there, to work at all or not to work. And essentially we are volunteering to continue working at a certain place, and how much of our effort we contribute to that as well. So the idea of control as opposed to influencing people is going to have a significant impact in the longer term about people's voluntary contribution while they are at work, and I think that's quite important. Sure. So let's kind of wrap this up in a minute. The final thing I would say is that if you have too much focus on task and not enough on a relationship, again, you can see that retention is going to be a problem. So what it means to me, I think servant leadership is there's some really good, fundamental, natural, easy to understand principles there. And what it means to me is that I have to continually remind myself to do it, because I've got an immense responsibility as a leader. Okay. There's responsibility and accountability to meet the needs of my people, right? And as a leader, that's when you talk about meeting the needs, that's meeting the needs of our employees, of our customers, of the wider community, society, environment. There's a bigger agenda and scope there for leadership today. So I think, as I say, coming back to my first point, I think I would like to think that all of my leadership decisions have in them somewhere a mix that says, well, how would I like to be treated in this situation? And that's the thing I'm trying to practice.
That's a nice question to ask yourself, isn't it? And for me, what servant leadership means, it's about that leadership is moving away from the one dominant decision maker into a more shared leadership. And it's about managing the information system rather than actually sitting there effectively as a task coordinator.
Yes.
Deborah, what's your take on that?
So I agree 100% with both of you, but I don't entirely agree with Ian when he says to treat people the way that you would like to be treated.
All right.
The key for me is to treat people the way that they would like to be treated.
Right. Okay.
And the distinction for me there, from a personality perspective and just in terms of how we all work, I might be fine with Ian, as my boss, being very direct and, because I'm the same way. But then you get people who are not very direct and almost take it as a personal attack, and you've got to change your approach a little bit. So it's almost a little bit about situational leadership, and it's about treating people the way that they want to be treated. And I talk about this, and here's a shameless plug. I talk about this in my book, Talent Liberation, which is the fact that I think we've all gone wrong. And Ian, you've spoken about it now, and you've almost wanted to blame yourself for it, but it's really not your fault. It's society as a whole's fault. The origins of servant leadership, and you look back at it in terms of religion and all of these other things, and leading without a title and serving people and helping them and being of service, where it all went wrong is when we brought profit into the mix, because suddenly we all became slaves to the corporate machine and to profit and to the fear that goes with the ever lingering threat of losing our jobs.
Yeah.
And what that's done is it's caused us to, at the core of your being, you might be a servant leader. And I know that you are, Ian, and so are you, Andy, because you do put your people first. But you're also a commercial leader, and you have shareholders to answer to. And that's going to cloud some of the decisions that you're going to make and some of your behaviors, unfortunately. But the fact that you know about that is your power right now.
So
and you can change it.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to that for me, one of the real fundamentals about servant leadership is that the greater leader is seen as the servant first. Now that's going to really be difficult for some leaders to swallow. Okay, that probably strikes at their very ego about a title or a position. Okay, so that's going to be a challenge for some people. But and so does the term servant leadership. Interestingly, about 3 weeks ago, only 3 weeks ago, when we agreed to actually do this subject on the podcast today, the following day there was somebody on LinkedIn that really challenged the term servant leadership because they just dismissed the notion of it. They dismissed the title. That was the bit that really lit their fire. So it was an interesting discussion that took place there. But for me, the absolute basis of it, and I'm going to come on to this later on, is about servant leadership actually creates growth and autonomy. Okay, because actually those two things, once you start setting those as your benchmark and you support people and you every day strive for better growth and better autonomy within your business, actually you've changed your business model. That's one of the core things. So let's shift on from about what this means to us, because I think that, and we discussed this, Ian, just before we press record, and we said that we could probably do several of these episodes as well because there's so many takes on them. But Deborah, come and help us out here a minute, right? Whereabouts do you see this actually happening at the moment? Where is servant leadership being made real?
I think that we see it more and more. And as much as we're all frustrated by this pandemic, the fact that people aren't co-located anymore is kind of, to an extent, forcing managers at work to actually be a little bit more hands-off and give people a little bit more autonomy, and starting to realize that, me being at home with dogs and children and a husband, you need to give me the freedom to work the way that's going to work for me.
Correct.
Not the way that was always going to work for you, which is having my bum in the seat, under your nose, as it were, between 8 and 5. And I think people are seeing we're like 4 months into this remote working thing now globally, and the world hasn't fallen apart because people aren't in the office at 8 o'clock, So we're seeing it everywhere. And I think there's been a couple of examples. And what I'm enjoying seeing is, Agile methodology. And you guys will know this at MHR and People First. When you look at the dev teams, because they do the daily stand-ups, we can learn a lot from the way that guys who work and use Agile methodology from the way that they actually work. And there is a role of an Agile coach, and there's the role of a Scrum Master. And what these people do is effectively servant leadership. They listen, they sit back, they're like, how can I help you? What's getting in your way right now? How can I help you resolve it? And they don't give you the answers, because most of the time they don't have the answers. You have the answers within you. And I think, you touched on it now, that so many people find the term so offensive, because it does kind of grate against their ego. But I think what we need to realize in more modern terms is it's almost, if we had to modernize the term, it's almost leader as coach. The coach doesn't run the race for you. They just help give you the tools and help you discover your own greatness and help you become better.
I love the leader as coach. I might challenge that and say, I think it's different to coach. I think it's more akin to project manager, because I think the whole thing of removing the blockers, providing the resources, expanding the skills, providing that bit of knowledge at the point it's needed. I think maybe it's a mixture of those two things. Now I'm thinking about it, I do see a bit of coaching in there, but I see it's wider than that. I'd hate for somebody to sit there and think that it's just coach, because we were on a podcast last week, Deborah, with a fantastic guy called David James, and he's an expert in learning, and his take was that if you bring somebody into the learning room and you say, right, now I'm going to make you all into coaches, his response was, well, no, you're not. That's not my job. And I think it's a really difficult one. I think there's elements of coaching, elements of project manager in there. I don't know. For me, I wouldn't want to pin all it to one.
I struggle with what's wrong with being a servant. What's being wrong with the office of wherever it is in the organisation structure, taking on the responsibility and the accountability to serve the needs of customers, the community, and the people that you're responsible for. I think the thing I've struggled with a little bit in the last week and a half looking at this is remembering that responsibility. And I think people tend to, and I always operate full accountability, Deborah. So society's got one part to it, and the media and all this sort of thing. But you have to take personal accountability to change. The point I'm trying to say is that I think there's nothing wrong with that. Reminding yourself that it is a responsibility, and that you're only going to be in that position, one, if you've got people that are willing to follow you and willing to stay the path and be there for the longer term. So I think there's nothing wrong with the word servant. You're meeting people's needs.
I don't think there's anything wrong either, but I think, again, this term seems to offend people to an extent, and I think just acknowledging that and realizing that it's difficult for people. Yeah. And then the other thing, and I agree with you about taking accountability, Ian, but I think, again, one of the mistakes that we have collectively made is that we are rewarding the wrong things.
Yeah.
We hire you, we call you a manager, but we expect you to lead. But everything that's in your KPAs and in your OKRs relates to management. It relates to planning, organizing, and control. There's nothing, I've never seen anyone's KPAs written, help your people be the best they can be. And until we start doing that, until we start changing, and Andy, you're saying, I'm going to turn you into a coach, and then someone turns around and says, it's not my job. Newsflash, it is your job. In fact, it is your only job. The better you become at coaching and empowering and enabling, the better your team is going to perform. And I think that we can learn so much from sports coaches. If you look at those coaches, rugby teams, football teams, yes, the team wins the trophy and the coach helped them. But at the end of the day, it was all those players on the field. What was the goal? You want to win the premiership. And as the coach, I can help you get there. I can help you see things that when you're in that scrum and when you're on the field and someone's running with a ball, you don't see. I can see it from a macro level, and I can help you. But at the end of the day, you're running out on that field. You're scoring the tries. You're doing, kicking the drop goals and all of those things. So I think it's starting to understand, and this is so many separate conversations for us around teams and the things that we can achieve when we work together. But I think starting to understand that your job as a manager is not to manage, it's to lead, and it's to empower, and it's to serve your people. I think we'll get somewhere. You
manage things, right? You manage tasks and processes.
You manage tasks.
That's not people.
You lead people. Yes.
Yeah, I like the idea of the icebreaker, the pushing things out of the way so everybody else can just get on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of analogy that sticks in my head. So, yeah. I honestly, I think there's so many different parts of the servant leadership, and I'm probably going to come onto it in a minute, actually, because I think there's a ton of good stuff here that probably comes into the modern day. Yeah. So,
well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Andy. Let me ask you a question. Let's put you on the spot. Why does it apply today, first and foremost, servant leadership as a concept and an activity? Why does it apply today?
Well, we're going to argue later about who gets the difficult questions in this. Okay. So I love the question. I think it's more relevant. I think it's got growing relevance because of actually how the world is changing, and the power and control approach actually is more difficult than it's been in the past, because actually people want to work differently. Deborah, as you just said, right? People want to work in a different way. So actually just doing I'm your boss, I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to give you this task and you've got to meet it. That's an old hat way of doing things. Now, the incredible thing is that, as I say, Robert Greenleaf wrote his book in 1977, and we're studying this throughout the 70s. And in the 90s, I think it was, he actually set up the Servant Leadership Institute. Amazing, right? But the fact is that he did that 30 to 40 years ago. Okay. And even this model and saying this is a new way of leading. Now that's amazing, right? That people are actually seeing this and wanting to actually use it and embrace it. And the reason why I think, Ian, is that it's more relevant today. I go back to what I said earlier. It's about the instilling of growth and autonomy. Okay, and the more that you can do that, the more that you can support, the more you can make that the go-to place for your employees. So stripping out the layers of communication as to who I have to ask in order to do something. I'm going to give you the autonomy, give you the empowerment. You can go and make this happen yourself. That changes people's businesses overnight. Now, as I say, this whole movement away from this dominant thing to this more sort of managing the information, that's more powerful. But in Greenleaf's book, and this has been kind of distilled down to 5 key principles, but bear with me on this. You can take any one of these, and I think that they're fantastic. I'm just going to list a few of them off. Things like listening, understanding, the language that you use, the beyond the conscious rationality, foresight, healing, right? Persuasion, community, and then lastly, this element of power and authority. Now, if you take all of those and you actually say, well, of those, what are the common traits? What is it that we actually need in today's environment? You can happily pick 4 or 5 of those and say, that's it. That's what we need, and that supports the servant leadership that we've got today. And again, I think the reason why it's massive stickability, this one, okay, is about people want to work for those servant leaders, and they want to work for those people that they've seen be servants before. And what that probably means is that they've worked in the same organization, they've seen how they operate, they've seen how they've approached problems, and they've seen them become a leader, because people often start off as a servant and then become the leader. Those that are actually the leader and trying to be the servant, that is a more difficult mix, and often they're the ones that don't quite make it. So I'm going to say that it is relevant, more relevant today than it probably even was when Greenleaf came up with this, for the simple reason that we're at a different time, that people are more acceptable to it. What do you reckon?
Yeah, a lot of that makes a lot of sense to me.
Deborah, do you go with that?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it speaks to, again, so servant leadership is just slightly younger than I am. So we've been around for a long time. So I think, previously we didn't really acknowledge the human need for the belonging and feeling seen and heard, and we didn't recognize the fact that people work, that they're motivated by more than just their paycheck. And I think servant leadership for me very much speaks to where the world is going. In a world where we're able to automate repetitive, mundane tasks, it's going to become more and more evident if I'm not able to change with the times and become that servant leader who can remove roadblocks and who can truly bring the humanity back to work. And it's going to become more and more important, and it speaks to our need to connect with purpose. And yes, I mean, I'm a fan.
Well, I just want to read out a quick quote, okay? And it's about this serving from the mentality comes from two premises. I serve because I am the leader, and I am the leader because I serve.
Because I serve, yes.
Okay,
Love that.
So that to me is the summary of this. So I'm going to say that again. I serve because I am the leader, and I am the leader because I serve.
Because I serve.
I just add to that, Andy. Sorry to jumping in, but where does the authority come from? Yeah. It's easy to recognize where power comes from because you're provided with it, you're given it in a position, and then it can easily be taken away. But I think that you become the leader because you serve. I think that's part of that authority, that the people give you the authority because of how you've served. Yeah,
and people are more willing to follow you and come along on that journey. And there's also a difference between come with me and come and follow me. Right? There's a difference in those two statements as well. And again, the servant leadership is about the come and follow me rather than come with me. It's about commitment by people as well, isn't it? That in order for people to actually believe in you, it goes back to what you just said, Ian, about that authority. People have got to believe in you. People have got to be absolutely with you on that. Otherwise, you've probably got a difficult task there. And there's still loads of different case studies, different modern day case studies, not just ones from the 70s and 80s when Greenleaf came out with this, of this actually being in place right now in different companies, and people still today setting out on a journey of servant leadership because they see it as the solution to their problems. Okay, so so that is available for people. But let's talk about resources. We feel that we've probably got to that point because as I say, I've read a whole pile of stuff on this, and I'm sure that that you guys have as well. But let's leave people with what we need. Ian, let's start with you. What resource have you got for us, please?
I've just got one. One.
Great stuff.
And it's a story-based book, and it's just completely got under my skin. So I'm going to say, go read it, go see yourself, go decide what you want to do. Right. So it's called The Servant by James C. Hunter, and it's just completely got under my skin. So good job, Mr. Hunter.
Well done. We're going to post all of these resources at the bottom of the show notes. Deborah, you mentioned a shameless plug for your book earlier on, but now's the point that it's not a shameless plug. It becomes a resource. So tell us about it and any of the resources that you wish to leave us with.
So my book does touch a little bit on servant leadership and on some of the beliefs around work and motivation and just some of the things that we need to retire and that we need to let go, and how we can really use performance management to get the best out of our people. It's this mechanism that we're not going to get away from in the workplace, and we might as well use it for good, to build good cultures and to transform teams and to help unleash human potential. So the book is called Talent Liberation, and the ebook is available everywhere right now, and the soft the paperback, the soft cover, is going to be available from, I think it's October, I'm not sure.
Wonderful.
But my actual resources for people who know a lot more about servant leadership than I do, I've got two. One is Simon Sinek. I mean, I think everyone loves him, and just so his book Leaders Eat Last, and I know that we've previously actually had it as one of the resources on the show.
Again, though.
And then there's a lovely book by a lady, Cheryl, I forget her surname now, but it'll be in the links. And her book was called Dare to Serve. And it is really her talking about how she took over from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. I don't know if you have Popeye's in the UK.
Yeah.
And yes, Popeye's was in a really bad place. And
it was.
She's very much credited for turning the business around, but how she did that was actually through servant leadership and through putting her people first. So it's a very interesting read about, again, what both of you have spoken about around the business case for servant leadership.
That's fantastic. Well, I look forward to having a look at both of those. I'm especially looking forward to your book, Deborah, and we might cover that separately in a different podcast. Okay. I'm going to leave everybody with Greenleaf's book, and I'm just going to show it to the camera there. There you go. That's the one that you'll need. It's Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. It's a bit timeless. It was written in 1977, and quite honestly, you can read it now, and there's some amazing stuff in there that absolutely sticks for today. So I encourage anybody that's not got that one, that's really looking for a true reference book to servant leadership, to go and read that. And please go and read about the Hess's Journey to the East, which is where Robert Greenleaf got this whole thing from about Leo the servant, because that again is another bit that I've learned about in the last few weeks about this, and that was quite an incredible thing. So I think one of the books that I might end up getting next is probably Hess's Journey to the East. Right. So anybody else for any more resources? I've only got one as well today. I feel lightweight at the moment.
No, I'm pleased with mine.
Yeah, and your book packs a big punch. So
okay, we're good. Let's stick there then in that case. Well, Hitten's not with us today, so it's probably a shorter episode. And we're sad to not have his wisdom and his thoughts on board today, but hopefully I've done him justice by including a quote.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the bit I'm hoping that he listens to and realises that was for him. But meanwhile, Deborah and Ian, thank you for taking part.
Thank you as well.
Thank you, Andy.
No problem, everybody. And we look forward to catching you on the next episode of Leadership, the Future and Tea. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts or Spotify so we can continue to reach more people and spread the message.